KHM stands for Kingdom Harbinger Ministries. I go by the alias of DivineProspect. I created this ministry organization, and the objective of it was to create services, programs, products, and goods to alleviate the societal ills that's experienced in the Black and Brown community. The objective, also on top of that, is to translate this Israelite knowledge that we are gaining into real world solutions for the community in hopes that we can bring others in, restore culture to them so we have a common code of ethics. Through that common code of ethics, we become a more close knit community, and blooming from out of that close knit community is autonomy, whereas we become more self governing in regards to the social affairs, political affairs, economic affairs, etc., that pertains to our community, right? So that's what the KHM element is. However, another branch of the KHM parent umbrella is the Divine Prospect grant, where I do teachings, lectures, provide scholarship, research methodology, etc. And we use various interdisciplinary means of accomplishing that. This particular study that we will be doing going forward is going to actually turn into an actual class on a VLE, a virtual learning environment platform that we're in the process of uh, narrowing down which one we want to use. We have several options, but we're trying to figure out which one we want to use primarily for this. And the objective of it is to allow things to be more engaging, right? Than just a pre-recorded session or maybe like a YouTube live stream or something along those lines. And the objective of it being holistic is the interdisciplinary aspect of it, which means that we actually look at various things that cross, I would say, roads with the things that we find in what's called the Bible, or people call it scriptures, which is a colloquial way of saying it, and trying to find ways to harmonize existential data with the internal data in the text. So that way we can get better insight to what's being conveyed with us today. And the better that insight is that we can get, the better that we can interpret something according to its appropriate context. And then from there, map it to things that are similar in our contemporary environment. And that way we'll be able to bridge that gap, and we know exactly how to apply those things that we read about from a past piece of literature and how it's applicable today, and applying a scientific methodology to it, so as that we take the data that we gather and then we put it through an algorithm type of hypothesis. And the objective is to give us an output that is consistent, that give us consistent results. So if I tell somebody in the Bible, it talks about meditation. What is meditation? Most people, they'll give you their own idea what meditation is, and a lot of times it aligns with the Taoist method of meditation. It really is not biblical meditation, and that's why when people perform it, they're not doing it the way it's prescribed, and therefore results may vary. It is not something that is repeatable, right? Because you're not doing it based on the prescription of the text, right? So a lot of times we do it amiss, and in doing it amiss, we don't get results that we are favorable to what we're looking to get. Same thing with prayer. You know, you ask somebody, "What's prayer?" Just pray, and they just do something that is a Western method of prayer that developed in the West. It's not how it's done or how it was done in that time period in which it was initiated, according to the Israelite cultural paradigm, right? So the key thing is to take all the data, look at it holistically, all the moving parts, right? Mechanically, and see how each cogwheel links into the other cogwheel, and see how that makes up the actual clock, right? That is trying to convey some form of information to us today. And a lot of times, some of those cogwheels are missing. So, in the process of doing this, we also engage in apologetics, because in the Israelite community, there's not a lot of what's called in the realm of academia and theology, systematic theology, which is a means of establishing a presupposition of the authorship of the text, and that presupposition is actually the preeminent way of actually looking at the world or maintaining a worldview, and that is to establish the ontological existence of the Creator, and that this text is what He intends for us to know to build a relationship with Him. And then from there, from the start of Genesis all the way to Revelation, or from Genesis to Malachi, you establish a consistent and cohesive and coherent thread of theology that moves its way on through, that everything is interconnected. It's very concise, and it's something that if it's to be conveyed, it can be easily digestible, right? You can absorb it, you can understand it. It's very clear, and then through that clarity, now you can begin to apply that knowledge, right? So you can begin to yield those repeatable results. Okay. Um, so I'm just looking at some of the messages that I'm getting as well, just to make sure I'm keeping up with the things that people are saying. But again, this room is open, so feel free to ping somebody to come on in, share the link wherever you want to share it on social media, bring people in. This is not going to be an extensive session because I have several things I have to take care of after I do this. But I want to start doing these sessions going forward. Any questions that you have in regards to Israelite culture, in regards to the Bible itself, in regards to elements of history as it pertains to the ancient Near East, language, customs, mannerisms, etc. Those things we'll be more than happy to address. Also, if you're a part of the Israelite paradigm and you're looking for better ways to work out your apologetics, the way that you defend your particular worldview under the scrutiny and the adversity of other opposing worldviews, we're more than happy to shed some light on that as well. Okay. Um, Let me see. Let me just check, make sure we good as far as time and numbers in the room. Okay, it looks like we have enough people in here to really get started. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to do also, and anybody that's interested in the stuff that we discussed, if there are some sources or some information that you may missed, this replay is on, which means the session is being recorded. The best advantage that you will have if you want to join this room consistently and keep up with the knowledge that's being conveyed is to sign up for our Patreon website. So Patreon is a way that you can patronize creators, content creators, speakers, lecturers, illustrators, designers, whatever the craft may be. It's a means that you can pledge a monthly amount that goes into investing into the success of that particular creator. And in exchange, they provide you with different tiers of benefits, right, that you get from accessing the Patreon. On the Patreon that I have, we have biblical Hebrew and biblical Greek language courses on there. We have Bible study software on there, paid versions of two popular Bible study softwares on there. We have give you access to my vast ebook library that I have, my digital library that I have. But so far, we almost at 300 books that we have on Patreon, which is pretty insane. And then we also have a library of articles. We also give you access to academic websites that you can go and grab information from. For example, we have a website that gives you the listing of all the Sumerian cuneiform tablets, right? You can get easy access to it. We also dive into health. So we have a website that gives you every element that you can think of that's used in naturopathic health. And it gives you all the scientific research behind it, right? So there's a wealth of knowledge, custom content that I put on there, video series that we have on there, tons of stuff that we have on there that if you're really serious of getting into this type of study, that would be the best place to equip yourself. And then the classes, the formal official classes that's based on this title, will be launching very soon. We're trying to tidy a couple of things up behind the scenes before we launch it officially, but to make sure it has our brand in, it's interactive, and we can do whiteboarding and things along those lines so that you can get the best experience out of these sessions because it's a lot of information, a lot of data, but as you start to get the hang of it and pull it in, it'll assist you, right? So I'll reference a couple of sources as well as we engage into the dialogue, and then I'll try to post what I can now that the feature is offered to pin it to the room so that you can click it and access it. But if you want anything else, sign up for the Patreon or just email me in the email address that's in my profile, and I'll be sure to get you that information. All right. All right, so as I peruse through Clubhouse and join these rooms or get pinged to join a room, typically when I listen, this edification that I get from time to time, but for the most part, I don't really, when it comes to the topic of the Bible or people that identify as Judeo-Christians or Jews or even Muslims or people outside of those paradigms, those Abrahamic paradigms, who deal with African spirituality, that deal with Kemetic spirituality, that deal with, or they're just agnostic. They don't have enough knowledge either way to make a decision, or they're atheistic. They don't believe that there's any kind of ontological beings or supernatural intervention in social matters today. They come into rooms. Sometimes Israelites engage with them, and pretty much the Israelite community does not have the best reputation in regards to public perception, and that's fine. I know a lot of people don't care or could care less about it. As far as I'm concerned, I do care to a certain degree because I think there's a better method that we can utilize for those people who are looking for a particular niche that suits them, that can actually draw them into this truth and into this way of life. And I feel that that mark has been missed a lot, especially on Clubhouse. There are some discussions, again, that does bring a wealth of knowledge and insight. I just don't think it's pretty holistic, and I don't think it's designed to be a paradigm shift, right? And this is very important. So when it comes to the brand or the school of thought that I identify with, it's not what's considered Abrahamic faiths. It has some similarities or similitudes to what's considered Abrahamic faiths, but it deals with something a little bit different because Abrahamic faiths are religions, right? They mostly stem from the post-exilic period and the development of the Israelite peoples, and then over time, when we get to 6th century, 7th century, and we deal with Islam, and the claim that they're from Ishmael, which comes from Abraham. These are things that develop much later on. The particular paradigm that we interface with is called a pre-exilic Israelite. Pre-exilic is the key thing. Pre-exilic Israelite cultural paradigm. Because what I've discovered is that when you get to the actual root or the shoresh of this particular Judeo-Christian understanding, it actually goes back to the pre-exilic time, right? Post-exilic is where religion started, and that started with the return of the Yehudim to Jerusalem or to Jerusalem, the Judites to Jerusalem, and that incorporated some Benjamites and some Levites as well. And they were reinstituting, right? A reform, right, that was started by their predecessors, such as Hezekiah and Josiah. But they initiated certain reforms, and these reforms were intended to uh, nationalize the community at that time that was splintered. And at that time, most of the northern tribes were already out of the land at that time. So you have something, I'm not going to say it's new, but you have something that has remnants of the past intertwined with things that are new because these people were out of their land for 70 years into another land in Babylon, right? And Babylon is a overarching term, and it encompasses various city states under a conglomerate of a empire. The Neo-Babylonian Empire was like the last phase of this empire that was then engulfed by the Persian Empire. So the return occurred under the decree of Cyrus, and these peoples had returned back to their lands, and they were given religious freedoms, right? And it's interesting because Cyrus is actually called the Mashiach of Yahweh, right? Or Yud He Wav He, or some of y'all say Yahweh, right? So it's interesting that when they come back 70 years separated from their typical duties and practices, they are trying to restore things. Now, the priestly class of the Zadokites, they maintained some of the pre-exilic elements while they were in captivity. However, we don't see a lot of the full practice because a lot of it circulated around the temple and the land, right? Um, and there's tons of good references, and I'm gonna mention one now. I don't have a digital copy of it, but if you're interested in picking up something so you can see that that deity land relationship or people deity land relationship, there's an excellent book by Daniel Block. It's called The Gods of the Nations, right? A study in ancient Near Eastern national theology. It's called The Gods of the Nations by Daniel Block. All right, he goes in there and he explains that relationship between the people, the deity, and the land and territories, which aligns with what we see in Genesis chapter 10, which is typically overlooked by a lot of people. But it has a much greater significance if you understand it within this ancient Near Eastern context. Now, another book that's a great reference to kind of get an idea on how we mesh together archaeology, history, the text, etc. It's a book called Pre-Exilic Israel, the Hebrew Bible, and Archaeology. Integrating Text and Artifact. Pre-exilic Israel, the Hebrew Bible, and Archaeology, Integrating Text and Artifact by Anthony J. Frendo. So a lot of the subject matters that's mentioned in these books give you the insight in regards to the pre-exilic Israelite culture. So what is the pre-exilic Israelite culture? Well, pre-exilic, pre means before, exilic has to do with the state of being in exile, right? Being excommunicated, right? Being pushed out of a place that was once yours, right? So in this case, that will encompass everything from the time period of the eponymous ancestor called Abraham, right? Eponym has to do with an ancestor that is believed to be the progenitor of the current people group that is in discussion. So in this case, it would be ancient Israel. And they believe that them, through their relationship with Ammon and relationship with Moab, that they go back to a common ancestor, right? And Abraham's ancestors in his lineage goes back to Eber, which everything is believed to have designated from. And it's interesting because that term Ibri, which is used to designate the word Hebrew, is a literary term. You're not going to find it very often during the pre-exilic time period, right? It's mostly a literary term when the text got into its final form because it was redacted over time. When it got to its final form, that term Hebrew was added as a literary device for a designation that had to do with an attribute of this eponymous ancestor by the name of Abraham. Okay. Um, so as I continue to go along, I don't want to say anything that's over anybody's head. So you can send me some back channel messages if you have any. As soon as I dive into this introduction, I kind of open it up towards the end to the panel so people can come on, ask questions, and we can engage a little bit before we jump off. But again, like I said before, feel free to share this link everywhere. And on top of sharing this link, be sure to ping everybody you know, anybody you think would be interested in this type of subject matter, because we'll be doing more rooms similar to this. We'll be deal with various different subject matters and topics. Another room that I want to deal with is the pseudoisms as it pertains to the Bible and Israelite as a people group, right? And that I think is very important because coming face to face with various other opposing worldviews on Clubhouse and social media and in real life. I think that our community does what it can, but we can do better in regards to defending against a lot of these false claims that's designed to push people away from this particular paradigm, right? And a lot of times it's because a lot of the leaders in this community are not thoroughly equipped to address a lot of these scrutiny or questions that come our way. When you go through the realm of academia, you learn about peer review, and peer review is necessary in order for you to be promoted or for you to be degreed. And with peer review, it's nothing you take personal, right? It's part of the process to vet your efficacy in regards to the work that you produce, right? And it's designed to make you better. So peer review is something that should be welcomed, which means that leaders should be open to peer review. If they say something, share something, and somebody disagrees, that person has to make an argument. And the argument is not just, simply just, oh, I just want to rebut what you're saying, but to come with a very thoroughly put together refutation, right? Hey, I'm not just going to argue with you to argue with you, but I want to actually refute what you're saying based on this data that I have here. Now, that can come internally from the text, or that can come externally from other sources surrounding the text, right? Right. So the purpose of me doing this is to predispose you about these particular rooms that will be going forward. And when we look at the pre-exilic period, we're going to deal with the cultural aspect of that, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a series of sources. And again, for those of you who came in late, if you want to get the wealth of the knowledge that'll be shared here in resource format, you can go to our Patreon website, which is www.patreon.com/DivineProspect. You'll also see the link to that in my profile. So if you missed that, just go to the link in my profile. If you have any additional questions and or concerns, you can inbox me there or email me at kingdomharbinger@gmail.com. And you'll actually see that in my profile as well. Okay. So that pre-exilic period is from the emergence of Abraham that we identify when the text opens up in Genesis chapter 11, all the way until we get to right on the cups of 587 BCE. Okay, 587 BCE is a second siege that the Babylonian Empire, by way of Nebuchadnezzar, waged against Jerusalem and against Israel, or the southern tribes that had hold of the southern province in Israel at that time. And the first siege happened in 597 BCE. Ezekiel was taken in that first siege. He was placed near the river Kabar, and that is where he was writing all these visions he was getting, because he was directing the people's attention towards Jerusalem because an impending siege was about to occur, right? So from that time period, from Abraham all the way up to Ezekiel, is considered the pre-exilic period. Now, within that pre-exilic period, there are phases within that period. So the Abraham all the way to Exodus 1 is one phase. So that's Genesis 11 to Exodus 1 is one phase. And then the emergence of Moshe in Exodus 2, and from Exodus 2 going all the way to the book of Joshua is another phase, because that's a substantial amount of time. That's about 120 years almost. Moshe was in Misraim, or Egypt, for 40 years. Then he was in Midian for 40 years. And then for 40 years, he had gotten the Israelites into what they call the wilderness. And when you hear that term wilderness, it doesn't mean an arid wasteland that has nothing to sustain life. That's a misconception that we preconceive based on what we identify a wilderness to be. Most wildernesses have oases and pasture grounds where you can actually feed your flock and allow them to graze. An oasis is typically a fertile piece of land that is surrounded by arid dry land, but it has springs there which bring forth water. It also has maybe palm trees or other forms of shrubbery, right? So oases and typically migration routes in periods that had arid, what you call a wasteland or arid areas, would be based on going from one oasis to another until you make your way to your final destination. Also, another interesting thing that you'll find in the topography of the geographical landscape of those regions is something called a wadi. A wadi is a dried up riverbed, which means that at some point in the history of that land, there was a river that flowed there, right? Which means a lot of migration routes from older human generations, right, are mainly uh, crafted around riverways. Okay, so you'll see a lot of key places in wadis, especially in Mizraim or Egypt, and also in other places in the ancient Near East, because there were ancient landmarks that was laid there and oral traditions in regards to migration routes that came from ancestors that existed in those areas when there was actually water flowing through those wadis, those dried up riverbeds. Okay. All right, so from your phase from Abraham all the way to Exodus 1, from the time of Moshe, it's 120 years, all the way to his successor Joshua. From Joshua's period all the way into the monarchy, which goes right through the period of Joshua in the text, Judges in the text, and then the beginning of Shemuel. Right, Shemuel was the last judge of Israel before the monarchy came on the scene. Right, then you have the monarchy period that starts with Saul, right, or Saul, and goes all the way to the 587 Babylonian captivity, right? So by the time Saul comes on, it's about 1100 BCE. So from 1100 BCE all the way to about 587 BCE is another phase, or the last phase, the monarchy phase of the pre-exilic period. So it breaks down from Abraham to Exodus 1, from Exodus 1 all the way to Joshua, with the beginning of Joshua while they're wandering in the wilderness. And then from the time that Joshua has his excursions into the land, when they cross over the Jordan River and enter into the land, that period of time, all the way into the monarchy. Now, there's some key things to note as we're looking at this pre-exilic period in the development of the cultural concepts of the people. You have to realize that language reflects the culture, and culture reflects the language. So sometimes language will inspire culture, sometimes culture will inspire language. When you get into the text, it is always good, especially if you're unfamiliar with the original languages, which will be biblical Hebrew and biblical Aramaic for what's called the Old Testament or the Tanakh. And then for the New Testament will be your Koine Greek, unless you get into other quote unquote translations, such as Syriac or Sahidic or Coptic or other neighboring languages as well. So if you get into the original languages, the key thing to note is that underlining the English translation or words that is associative with the English equivalent that's used in a translation. And sometimes it's the best that the English has that represents the totality of what that particular underlining word in the original languages mean, right? A good example of that is the word love, okay? In Koine Greek, you have various words that exemplify the overarching term love in English. A great example of that is John chapter 21. In John chapter 21, there's a conversation between Yeshua and Cephas, right? And they're going back and forth about love. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that up so you can kind of get an idea of what it is that I'm talking about. Okay. And I'm going to do this also elsewhere in other chapters as we go along, because again, this is just an informal introduction into these classes that we do that will kind of pretty much equip you. So as we're going through the text, we'll break it down piece by piece. All right. So in Yachanan 21 or John chapter 21, starting at verse 15, right? It starts off, and I'm going to read from the ESV. Okay. Now there are free Bible study software online. One is BibleHub.com, and the other is BlueLetterBible.org. Okay. And there's a ton of resources on there that people typically don't use because they're not aware that it's there. There's an atlas on there, there's commentary on there, there's word studies on there, there's lexicons on there, there's help studies on there, there's several different resources on there that we can utilize. But I think because people do not thoroughly know how to use a Bible study software, this is just a web version of Bible study software, they typically don't take advantage of it. But as we go through our classes, not only will we teach you how to use free sources online, but if you decide to invest in a Bible study software such as Logos or Accordance or other versions similar to them, they give you more depth of information and tools than what you can get online. Online is the free version. You know, with the free version of anything, it's limited, but when you get the paid version, you get better resources, etc. Right? Typically, a lot of the content that you get on free resources online from blueletterbible.org or biblehub.com, a lot of it is dated. And the reason for that is because a lot of that content has to be dated because it goes into the public domain over time when there's no real copyright on it. And therefore, those things can be used at no cost to whoever's providing that particular platform. And in this case, it will be the authors and the people who operate these websites, right? However, when you get a paid Bible study software, a percentage of what you pay go towards the books that are acquired, right? And these books are more up to date, okay? And you can also purchase these books separately and add them to your library, right? So on our Patreon, we do have the paid version of Logos, we have the paid version of Accordance, and these are on our Patreon, right? That you can get at our $20 tier and above. These are paid versions that I paid a lot of money into, so you can get a wealth of knowledge that is not accessible for free online. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's very important. All right. So the one that we're going to use is BibleHub.com. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that to the link above, so you can just click on it. It makes it easier for you. Just give me a second. All right, so the link is here at the top. You can click on the link, and that link will take you to the site that we're using. So I'm using the ESV, and I'm reading it in the ESV. All right, let me go ahead and go back to it. All right, so John 21, starting at verse 15, it says, when they had finished breakfast, Yeshua said to Simon Peter, Simon Bar Yochanan, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, right? Do you love me? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Feed my sheep. Verse 18 says, Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you were old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you to where you do not want to go. Verse 19 says, This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify the Most High. And after saying this, he said to him, Follow me. So the disconnect, what is the disconnect there? And these are the things that we look at in our classes that I teach the students, is what is the disconnect there? Is the disconnect some kind of cultural thing? No, can't really be, because they're from the same culture. So this is not two different people from two different cultures having some kind of issue in communicating information. That's not the case. Could this be something that a master student relationship or teacher student relationship, where the teacher has some insight information that the student doesn't have? Could be, could be. What about a linguistic difference? Could there be something linguistically that is causing that divide between this communication going on here? And if that was your guess, then you would be correct. Why? Because if you go back and look at the word love there, starting at verse 15, when Yeshua is the speaker and Simon Peter is the recipient of what's being conveyed, you'll see that the word that he's using there is different than the word that Simon Bar John is using, or Simon Peter, son of John, is using. So what you typically do is in Bible Hub, you will click on the blue number that precedes the verse or the clause. So in this case, you will click on the blue 15 that's there. And then at the top, you're going to have two rows. One row is going to be a row of Bible translations, NIV, NLT, ESV, BSB. Underneath that is going to be a different row that says parallel, sermons, topical, Strong's, common, interlinear, Greek, lexicon, multi, right? So what we're going to do is in that second row, we're going to click on interlinear. Now, interlinear, for those who are not familiar, is designed to give you several things. The first thing is at the center of the interlinear is the original language of the text. Okay. And typically underneath that, you have the direct translation of it. Now, that could be a good or bad thing depending on how you look at it. If you read the direct English translation of the original language there, the syntax will be off. Meaning that English syntax typically follows a subject, verb, object kind of relationship in syntax, right? In a simple noun, subject, predicate sentence, right? However, there's other things that's involved. You have justives that could be added to there. You can have interrogatives that could be added there, and a series of other things. But when you read it, it's not going to read like English. It'll read like it's Greek, because the purpose of it is to show you that these different grammatical forms in Greek, how it directly translates in English, and how a Greek reader would be reading it in their language. So you'll see certain things that are there, but underneath that, you'll get the grammatical constituents of that particular piece of the sentence. So once we start there, you have what's called, you have your word when, and then therefore, hote, when, and then therefore, aun, hote, aun. So you have your conjunction, which is your therefore, and then you have your, where it says adv, that's your adverb. Adverbs always modify verbs. So if I said that Johnny is running, running is the verb. But if I said Johnny is running fast, fast is the adverb. It's modifying the verb. The conjunction is something that is bringing two clauses together, typically, right? It can mean other things, but just at a simplified form, that's what it means, right? So the thing that we're going to look at for our word study is not to go through the interlinear itself, but we're going to go and look up the particular word. Here, we're going to look up the word love you, which should be in the second row of the interlinear, and it's agapas. right? You'll see it there, agapas, love you, right? So if you click on the number right above it, that is your Strong's key to your Strong's Concordance and Strong's Lexicon. Now, a lot of people, because they use free Bible study software, will use the Strong's and really not two things. The Strong's can be misleading if you're not sure what you're looking at. And number two, it is a very, very old lexicon. There's been a lot of more recent lexicons that is much better. One of my favorites, well, I got several favorites, but one of my favorites that I like in regards to the New Testament in Greek is the Dictionary of Biblical Languages, the Greek domain, right? And that's you can typically get that from Logos. And there's several others like the Thayer's lexicon is a little bit more up to date than the Strong's. That one is still a classic, but it's much newer than the Strong's. And there's several others that have been released since then. But the good thing with the Strong's, it at least gives you an entry point on how to utilize a lexicon, so you can always use additional lexicons. The lexicons that's a little bit better, right? And again, we're going to get back to establishing this pre-exilic mindset and why our approach is different from Abrahamic religions and how they do their systematic theology, right? But I just want to show you something very key here that is essential in studies, and why, if you don't look at the underlying word in the original language, you'll be thrown off when it comes to the context of what's being done, right? So above agapas in the interlinear is a number that's 25. That's your Strong's key number. You're going to click onto that. And when you click onto that, that'll bring you to another section where it'll give you the word agapao, right? And if you look on the left, it says Strong Concordance, agapao, which means to love. And then it goes down further and gives you the original word in the Greek. And then it gives you the part of speech, the transliteration, the phonetic spelling, the definition to love, the usage, etc. What we're going to do looking at this is we're going to identify the word itself, agapao. That's the word that's being used by Yeshua, right? Now, if we go back, you just hit your back button once, hit your back button twice, hit your back button three times. You'll get back to the narrative prose of the text that we was originally at, right? And then you're going to go and see what Cephas is saying. He follows up by saying, he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Well, hit your forward button again. That'll bring you to the parallel Bible section. Hit your forward button one more time. That'll bring you to the interlinear that you were just previously at. And what you want to do is go back and look at that word for love that Cephas is using. And you'll see it's Strong's 5368, which is philo. Philo. If you click on that Strong's key number, it'll bring you to the breakdown of the word phileo, right? And phileo is a different type of love. So Yeshua is conveying one type of love, but Cephas is conveying a different type of love. That is where the disconnect happened. So I've seen a lot of pastors do sermons on this type of thing and make all types of stuff up. But all they had to do was just go to the original language, even if they don't speak it or know it too well, and just do a word study. And you'll see this is what caused the disconnect. And you'll see similar things in the Tanakh as well. Okay? So this is just giving you or conveying to you how rich these studies are that we do, because we use tools, not just free tools, but paid tools that we provide, other books and external sources that help us to understand what this is. So a good way to break this down further is to go into a lexicon. A lexicon is a dictionary of the original language that underlines the English translation. Okay? So your original language in this case is Koine Greek. Koine meaning common Greek. Because then you also have classical Greek, which are works that was written prior to Koine or common Greek. Okay? The Greek that's used to in the manuscripts we have today, more abundant manuscripts we have today in the New Testament, is not a special kind of Greek. It's just Koine Greek, right? Which means you have to actually look outside of just what you find in the corpus of the data bank of words that make up that lexicon, and to other lexicons and or other works that are written in Koine Greek, sometimes to get the fullness of what things mean. And sometimes it also goes back to dealing with classical Greek. A great example of that is the word daimonion, which means demons, which is loosely translated as demons. That concept, demons, starting with Justin Martyr, where he associates that term daimonion with the fallen ones that go back to Bereshit chapter 6 or Genesis chapter 6. He's the one that made that equation. However, daimonion has a different usage and understanding and context prior to his usage and his affiliation with that to fallen angels. Now, if you're not familiar with the works of Justin Martyr and the apologetic discourse that he had in regards to taking this term and giving it a connotation outside of its original usage within the actual text that he's actually reverbing it from, you have to go back and look at his work. Well, we also have a book that incorporates all the works of all of the ante-Nicene, Nicene, and post-Nicene church fathers. And that book is 38,000 pages long and is a digital ebook that we have available for you to access on our Patreon if you're interested. And you can actually go into the works of Justin Martyr and you can actually see him using that. But daimonion has a usage prior to the New Testament that shows up in classical Greek, and its term or usage is not anything intrinsically evil. It is typically an intermediate entity, an ontological entity that is supernatural in essence, that is an intermediate between people and higher gods or gods that are greater. They're intermediary, and typically they are not evil per se, right? And again, I'm gonna give you a good example of this reflecting in the Tanakh. And then again, you'll get to see how we work and how we derive our semantical values for terms that's conveyed when we communicate this type of information to people who have an opposing worldview to us, right? So a great example of what I'm saying, I'm gonna pull it up for y'all real quick. And again, you can use the same resource that we've been on, which is BibleHub.com. A great example of that would be our Deuteronomy or Devarim in Hebrew, Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 17. Okay. And again, once I complete this word study to kind of give you some insight on how we work in these classes, we're going to sum up the pre-exilic period and understand how what we teach is marginally different than what else is out there and how we come to our current worldview based on that. And this is just to give you some insight into the word study element, like how we look into words, right? And understand these words in a myriad of different usages, not just limited to the text that we have. Okay. So in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 17, and again, this is from the ESV, it says, they sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that they had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. Now remember how we go into doing our study. At the top above this, there are two rows, one with Bible translations and the one below with Bible helps. We're going to click on the row that starts off with parallel, sermons, topical. And we're going to click on interlin. And then we're going to look for that word for demons, right? It says two demons. Now, as you go into the Hebrew language, you'll see you have the lamed prefix with the kach underneath, which is literally la. But you have the dagesh in the middle of the shin that's there, which means it should be las and then shedim, las shedim. And that word there is shedim. It is the masculine plural. Whenever you hear im, which is herik, underneath a consonant, yod, that succeeds that in final mem, im, that indicates masculine plural. Okay? So it's masculine plural that we're dealing with here, right? And lamed is the preposition prefix to that word shedim. So when you go and click on 7700, and that brings up your Strong's Concordance first, and then your NAS, which is your New American Standard Exhaustive Concordance, it says the word is shed or shade. The word origin is of foreign origin. Keep that in mind. That's very important, right? Again, the pre-exilic understanding of what demons are. And again, when we deal with daimonion, again in future sessions, We're going to go into classical Greek lexicons, and we're going to see what was intended with that particular word. Now, remember, in this time period, in what's called Palestine today, at that time period, the province of Judea, you have these Aramaic speaking Jews. Okay, Aramaic speaking Jews. Some were bilingual, some were not bilingual. The lingua franca of that time was Koine Greek, although Latin was also used as well at a high administrative level, and sometimes for various cultic groups, they would use Latin, right? Um, but the key thing is these are people who are their native language is Aramaic, which is a sister language to Hebrew. And if they did write these manuscripts in, let's say, another language, in this case it would be Greek, Koine Greek, they have to utilize the best word that they can, and the language is being translated into that can be associated with their native language. And sometimes it can work out great, sometimes it may not work out great, right? And then later on people will tend to add other connotations to it. But in this case, you'll see that it's a foreign origin, a word of foreign origin. What is that doing in the text? Well, it's interesting because the place of where this word comes from is the point of reference. So you'd have to go back and study that culture. But we're going to find out where it comes from. If you scroll down further, you'll see something called the Brown Driver Briggs. That is a lexicon that's later than the Strong's. Okay. And it's a little bit better because what it does is that it gives you sister cultures, Semitic languages that have similar, what we call cognates, which means they share either in the phoneme, how it's pronounced phonetically, or they share in their what we call their trilateral roots. Most Semitic words go back to a Proto-Semitic language, and they have shared roots between them that goes to show the close-knit relationship that they had at one point in time before they branched out. But if you go down further, you'll see in the Brown Driver Briggs, it says a noun masculine, apparently demon. It's a loan word from the Assyrian Shedu, a protecting spirit, especially of Bull Colossus. Wait, what? That's interesting. So when you look at this Bull Colossus, this protecting spirit, that is what it was believed that these quote unquote demons are. Okay? So that word that's used for demons that we're given the English translation for is not really applicable because these are spirits that are protecting something. And what happens is when you step out of the boundaries of your patron deity or the covenantal power that you align yourself with, in this case, Israel aligned themselves with Yahweh or Yahoo, Yahweh. And when you step outside those covenantal boundaries and you perform practices to another God, deity, power outside of the one that you have a covenant with, you've breached your contract or the covenant you have with that initial deity, the ancestral deity of your forefathers. And now you're engaging in the practice with a foreign deity. What happens is two things. Number one, you are trespassing, okay, because that's not your culture. You're trespassing, right? That's number one. Number two, if you don't perform the ceremony or the ritual appropriately, there's consequences. If you're an Israelite, you're given statutes, laws, and commandments. This is part of the rules and regulations, the laws and bylaws of the covenant. If you perform these tasks outside of what's prescribed, you're a violation. Now, there's remedy and recourse in some cases, depending on what it is. If there's a capital offense, it's a totally different story. But there's remedy and recourse that you're given that if you violate it, this is what you do to repair, do reparations. However, in another culture, if you're sacrificing to the patron deity of another culture that have their laws and bylaws, who's allowed to perform this and that according to their cultural norms, etc., what happens is protective deities of that culture become adversarial towards you. So in the case of the bull colossus, you look up the Lamasu. Lamasu are these hybrid entities that have a man's face, a bull's body, and wings that typically guard the palace and temples of the Assyrian kings and Assyrian priesthood and Assyrian peoples. And these two entities, what would typically happen is before you come to the inside a palace or a temple, you will be greeted with these towering entities that's sculpted out of stone or other things as well. And they are typically encapsulating a spiritual force. And what happens is you typically have to give some kind of sacrifice or offer that's appeasing to these guardians, and they will allow you entrance into that temple or that palace. Okay? So what happens is it's typically for people who have been given an invitation to enter. But if you have been not given an invitation, decide you're going to do whatever you want to do to get in, you're in violation. So those protective spirits that those sculptures represent are now will become adversarial towards you. So they're not intrinsically evil. They have a purpose and a function, but becoming adversarial towards you is what makes it ra or evil in Hebrew. Okay? This is the understanding as to why, when they were given these statutes, these laws, and these commandments, that they were to keep these things, to keep them separate from the neighboring nations, because as long as you are applying this within its appropriate context, you are afforded provision, protection, and production. And then, as a benefit of those initial three things, is prosperity. Put your hand to the plow, put your hand to sow, to reap, right? You'll get things, and longevity of life. Other cultures intrinsically have their own terms and conditions of their covenants. A great example of that is the Misha stele. Misha is mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 3, but he is also mentioned in a stele, an archaeological artifact, where he's speaking about his god Chemosh, and they have a relationship. And the Moabite people violated the covenant with Chemosh, and therefore he allowed the Moabites to be subdued by the Israelites. So wrapping this thing up, and again, you can go back and look up the Lamasu, right, and the Assyrian culture to see what that is. But this is what they're talking about. Those peoples were sacrificing to the bull colossus, to the Shedim. And if you go into their Syriology lexicon, which you can get from the Oriental Institute online, you'll see all the various usages of that word shade or shedim, which is plural. And then you'll see it associated also with the lamasu. Sometimes it's also associated with the life-giving spirit that is inside man, depending on the context. Okay? So let's wrap up, and then I'm going to open up the stage for about 15 minutes, and we're going to close out. And again, you can definitely follow me on all forms of social media. It is in my profile. Follow me on those forms of social media. If you want to get more data based on the stuff we're discussing and go further in yourself, sign up for our Patreon, where we have a wealth of resources that are there. You help to support the scholarship that we utilize for these classes, as well as its other benefits that we provide as well. So when you go to the site, you'll see the various tiers and the different benefits that come along with it. Also, if you have any questions, concerns that we were not able to address today, you can actually email us at kingdomharbinger@gmail.com, and we can address them accordingly. All right. And if you need any resources that's mentioned here, like the names of the books that I referenced, also requested in the back channel to me here or the email, and we'll provide them to you if we have them. If we don't, then we'll send you to a link to the Amazon where you can purchase it for yourself. All right. All right. So summing up, pre-exilic. The objective of pre-exilic is to go into the culture. The culture is not necessarily the religion. Typically, religion is, let me see the best way I can say it. Religion is extracts of the culture that deal with your piety towards a deity, some kind of ontological supernatural being, right? That has an existence outside of our human experience, right? So that's when we look at religion, that's what religion is, and religion is a code, a codification of various statutes that pertains to the piety towards a deity and towards other people, right? It takes from the essence of culture, but culture itself is really the customs and mannerisms of a people group. Okay? And those customs and mannerisms encompass every aspect of their reality, their spirituality, their economics, their politics, views on health. The environment is an ecosystem that also plays on the culture because a lot of the elements in the language comes from immediate environmental context. Here's a great example of that. If you hear an oral tradition from a jungle people that lived in, let's say, the Congo or the Amazon jungle, and you come there and you hear a tradition from these people about some kind of arid wasteland or desert or something along those lines, and the word that they use is foreign. How do you know it's foreign? Looking at the morphology, the makeup of the actual word. You can tell if it's foreign or if it's indigenous or whatever. And you hear that they're talking about some kind of desert and their oral tradition and the word that they use sounds much different. Let's say, for example, it sounds close to your language, right? Let's say you're Hebrew and you live in the Negev, and you hear a word like meat bar, and you hear some Amazonian peoples talking about some kind of oral traditions about something that came somewhere from a place where there was no foliage and everything was arid, dry wasteland. First of all, you're gonna be like, wait a second, this cannot be indigenous to these people because this is a reality that they would have never known. And the Piraha peoples and similar other groups and tribes that live in the Amazon, they've never known to not have plenty because the environment in which they live dictates their culture. For example, if they are talking about directions, it's going to be centralized on a common feature of the environment that is known to the entire tribe. In the case of the Amazon, it'd be the Amazon River. So you're going to go towards the bend or away from the bend, which would be your left and right, or you're going to go towards the source of the water flowing down. That'll be your north. And if you go in the direction on where the water's flowing, that's your south direction. Everything is centered or hinged upon a geographical feature or a topographical feature, right? So if you hear them saying something about some kind of arid wasteland, you know that that's foreign. That is not something based on a morphology of their language. It's different. The phonetic value it has sounds different. And even that concept environmental feature is something that they would have never experienced. So you know at some point, somebody from another region encountered these people and integrated through means of acculturation. When two different cultures are side by side, cultural fusion happens where cultural things from one culture enter into another culture. We know that here in America because we had black people, African Americans, whatever byword you want to use, in the Caribbean, and those that lived here, that was taken here in America, had really two different experiences over time. However, you'll have certain foods that would be popular in the Caribbean that now, when those people migrate to America, right, USA, and they come into, let's say, Brooklyn, right, or North Bronx, where you have Caribbean peoples that settle there, now, what comes with them is different foods, rotis that they may talk about, salt fish, different terms about different things in their environment as pertains to food and other things as well, right? That start to enter into the colloquial speech of all the peoples that live in that region. So you may not be from that area, but somebody from the area introduced that concept into your day to day speech, right? So now when we're looking at this, right, these peoples and they bring in this oral tradition, now you can find ways to parse out features of oral traditions to see where certain elements come from. So you can see where influence is. And in the term of the Israelites, we see that they were side to side with the Assyrians. So we can look at the first uses of that word and kind of guesstimate when it entered into the Israelite consciousness, right? But looking at the customs and manners of a people, their day-to-day routines. Okay, and there's several books on this as well. And for the sake of time, I'll mention it in a follow-up session. But books that show you their day-to-day customs and mannerisms, their language, the geography of where they're located at, topographical features, birds and animals, which is fauna, which is animals, and flora, which is plants that are in media environment, foods, their proximity to a water source, okay? migration routes and why they take certain migration routes. All of these things make up their consciousness, their cultural consciousness. Okay? How they view the gods or other supernatural entities or powers. For example, there are a lot of mountains in the ancient Near East. And a lot of these mountains pierce through the clouds, the lower stratum of the atmosphere, right, where the cumulus layer is, and other layers of where the clouds are at. There's mountains that pierce through there. So they believe that the gods lived on the mountaintops because they believe that they're in a realm in the sky that we can't see that is protected by clouds. So the concept of a cloud rider has to do with deities that reside on mountaintops. They park on mountaintops, and when they go from mountain to mountain, they use or ride on the clouds. And whoever is the typical cloud rider is also responsible for rain. Baal, after he resurrected after his battle with Mut, or the god of death, and the Ugaritic text called the Baal cycle, and it's mentioned, but it's called by other names, where he fights the god Mut, or the god of death, and he is resurrected, or he's brought back to life after he's killed. He is now brought into the realm of the clouds, where he becomes the cloud rider. He's in the sky now. He's no longer on in the earthly realm. He's in the sky, and then he becomes responsible for raindrops. So when the Israelites went into the region of that time of Canaan, and they supplanted the peoples that lived there, now what happened is Yahweh becomes the cloud rider. He becomes a sustainer of life. And now through his covenant with Israel, he says that if they keep his statutes, laws, and commandments, he will ensure that the rain will occur in its season so they may continue to produce food, right? So that pre-exilic consciousness goes back to the culture of the people, the core culture, which intertwines various elements of that society. It is one package. And that through the culture gives you the insights into how people live day to day, what their perspective was within their time frame that differed from how we view things today. And this is what happens with people who take things out of context. They are judging a culture in the past by Western standards of today. And whenever you do something like that, it is extremely asinine because it shows that you have little to no understanding of cultural norms during that time that differs from our time period because there are different cultural rivers in which this flow of consciousness comes from. And we have to be careful not to intertwine them or use our modern perspective to interpret things of the past, but let things of the past interpret itself. And once we have an understanding of that, we do a one-to-one mapping. It's called bijection. It's a mathematical formula where you have two domains, which are two things that house other things, and you're mapping variables from one domain to another domain to see how things line up. For example, that word love, right? If you're looking at that word love in English, that word will be called love in like original language that we just looked at, phileo or agapao. We can give different words instead of just love because it'll better map with how we think of things in society. For example, eros is a sexual intimacy type of love, right? So there's words that we can use to cover that type of love as opposed to just generally calling it love. That's a one-to-one mapping, taking one thing from one domain and trying to map it as closely to another domain as possible. And it's only when you're able to make that type of relationship by bridging it appropriately can you get the full essence of applying the thing that you're reading from the past and see how it applies today. Okay. So we went over several things on today, but I just want to give you some insight into the introduction of how we do our classes. It gets much more deeper than this. But if you're interested in stepping your game up and getting further into this text, you must understand the culture. And the pre-exilic culture is the shores or the roots that actually give sustenance to the leaves of the religions that developed out of it. And that is what we're going towards. We're going towards the shoresh. All right, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this introduction to our KHM Holistic Research Paradigm for Bible Study. All right, It's geared mostly towards Israelites, but anybody's welcome to join in and listen in, whether you're Christian, Jew, Muslim, atheist, spiritual, African spiritual system, whatever. It doesn't matter. This is information that I think that will help everybody get a concise understanding of how we should view this text before we come to our own conclusions, because you need the foundation first before you can build the house and populate the house. And a lot of people are missing that foundation because they think the foundation is simply just the trunk and the leaves, and they neglect that there's roots there because the roots are covered. It's out of sight, out of mind. And we go back to the roots to uncover these things so we can properly restore, well, before restoration, reconstruct, and then restore the culture back to the people it was intended for, so that through proper application, they can yield repeatable results that are designed to alleviate the societal ills that they experience in their immediate community context today. All right. So with that, if anybody wants to come to the stage, ask a question, have a comment, I'm going to give another 10, 15 minutes to do so. Just let me know. I can bring you to the stage. You can add some insight comments. If not, then nobody has anything. Again, go to my profile, follow us on all forms of social media. The email address is there if you want to contact us. Please sign up for the Patreon so you can get more resources about a wealth of the things that's been discussed today and future things that we'll bring out going forward. Um, and you can ask me questions in the back channel or ask me questions on social media via email or anything else, but we're here to help and assist. All right. And our Patreon is www.patreon.com/DivineProspect. Or if there's a book or reference that I mentioned, email it to me, the request, and we'll be able to send it out to you. Okay. We also provide, as KHM, provide a wealth of other services and programs. We have a debt elimination credit repair program where we teach you financial, or what we call fiscal responsibility, and help you eliminate derogatory marks off of your credit report. We also have a naturopathic health consultation and education program that teaches you how to take ownership of your body and how to put yourself back in the Edenic state that man had initially before he was excommunicated from the Don or the garden. And we have several other things that we offer to the community. Our Handmaids of Zion, which is a service we offer to provide domestic care for parents that normally don't get a break from their day-to-day duties because they have children and other responsibilities. We also have our midwifery program, our Shifra and Pua birthing stool service that we offer. We also have our Israelite Deployment Force, which is a security force that people subscribe to that we use to deploy in times of need. We also have an emergency delivery service where people who may have encountered some kind of act of God, like an earthquake or a pandemic, and they can't get access to basic necessities and supplies, we're able to get that over to them, and a variety of other programs, services, products, and goods that we offer the community, so that way we can enhance not only the well-being of our own people and take ownership by means of autonomy or self-governance of our own affairs, but also teach people how to take care, fend for themselves, or provide them opportunities to do so. Okay. All right. So since nobody is looking like they want to give a question or have a comment, I'm gonna go ahead and end this session. So please, we have a I don't know what it's called on Clubhouse. I guess it's a house that you have rooms in, but we have a Clubhouse, a KHM Holistic Research Paradigm for Bible Study, or KHM Clubhouse. So please sign up for that Clubhouse if you will. Also on here, let me see. I got a couple of messages people shared. Um, Also, you can follow me if you're brand new, because I see people down at the bottom who are not affiliated with me or anybody else. Feel free to follow me on here as well. I try to make appearances in other rooms when people send for me or ping me, and try to provide this type of knowledge there and try to correct some misunderstandings of things. A lot of times I'm given the amount of time to do so. Sometimes I'm cut off or kicked out the room, because typically identifying as an Israelite, when you come into rooms where people are hostile towards Israelites, they'll typically entertain somebody that is not intellectual. But the moment that you provide intellect, which is not a bad thing, the Most High has given us a mind, a lead, in which all of this knowledge flows from, right? And we should be conveying it in an articulate way where we can explicate our points and ideas in a format that does not require us to be over assertive, right? We just speak, and it is. And when they sense that, and they see that there's several brothers and sisters that move like that, it becomes very threatening because it's very difficult for them to disarm the points that we make because we're thoroughly studied and we stand on our square firmly, all right, and flat footed. So the key thing is to equip you so you can begin to edify yourself because the best teachers are the ones who teach their students how to teach them. And because they will continue to be a perpetual student, there will always be something to learn. All right. And you can learn from anybody or anything. All right. So with that, hold on one second. Let me see if anybody here wants to join real quick.
Shalom, my brother.
Shalom King, go ahead, the floor is
Oh
yours.
man, I just want to thank you for your time and your wisdom and knowledge. Uh, I'm always blessed, you know what I'm saying, when you take the floor. And I just got a simple question, a couple of simple questions. You know, I'm still kind of green in this truth, so please bear with me. Uh, it's kind of off the subject as what you were
No
talking,
problem.
talk, but it's it's chicken and turkey a clean uh, animal?
Great question. So there is a rabbinic debate over whether chicken is clean or unclean, and then there's other groups that subscribe to the text that will say to you that chicken is unclean. Now, there's one interesting thing that I want to point out when we go into the Levitical law, and I'm glad you asked that question, my brother, because and you know what? I'm just going to take that one question, and then I gotta go. So if you have any other questions or what, you can hit me up other means, and I can address it for you, or wait till we have another one of these sessions, and you can feel free to ask it. But the key thing is, there's something that I'm going to show everybody here on what we do in regards to our classes. So we're going to go to Leviticus and jump down to Leviticus 11. Now, what I want to do before we proceed is I want to share a link and a video that I did that touches on this subject matter. It's not a full-on video on that topic, but it covers the subject matter in regards to the dietary law, right? So if you just give me a second, y'all, let me pull it up real quick, and then I'm gonna share the video in the link above. Let's see if it comes up. Okay, yeah, I got it. All right, let me go ahead and share it. All right, so that's the link right there. All right. All right, so y'all can go back and watch that video because that video we go in depth where we show you the cultural understanding of the dietary law, aside from religion, because there's a practical usage for it. And if you use that approach to sharing it with people outside the religious norm, people can absorb it or digest it better. In Leviticus chapter 11, there's something very interesting that we see here when it comes to what we call birds. Okay, now there's something from called from UBS, which is it's a United Bible Societies, and they have a book called The Fauna and Flora in the Bible. Now that's accessible on the Patreon as well. And in there, what they do is that they go through all the birds and all the plants. That's not just birds, but animals and plants that are mentioned all throughout the scriptures, each and every one of them. They give you the Hebrew word, maybe tell you about some kind of cognizance in other cultures, identify you what that bird is. A few of those birds are extinct today. Some of them still exist, right? But it goes into animals that are native in that region and or some that were imported, right? Chicken is not indigenous to the Levantine region. Okay, Levantine being from the border of the Sinai Desert, right, or Sinai Peninsula, South Negev, all the way to Syria. And from that region and bordering to where we say Jordan is at. So all of that's considered the Levantine region, right? Chicken is not indigenous to that region, meaning that it was imported there. Chicken that we have today is a domesticated fowl, right? Meaning that there's a wild fowl variant that existed before we got that domesticated form. How do you know an animal is domesticated? Because you look at various things. Number one, you do craniometrics and you look at the skull to see skull size. Typically, domesticated animals have much smaller brains, much smaller skull. You look at the musculoskeletal system. Typically, their bones and their muscles are much smaller than the wild variant. And also, you check for their stress hormones. Stress hormones, for example, I'll give you an example of a dog, right? Dogs are domesticated wolves, okay? They have a fight or flight stress hormone, okay? That is designed to prepare them to run or to fight. And wild animals, that is always activated, especially if you are a particular species that's a male that's constantly fighting for territory, fighting for females or whatever, or if you're prey that's constantly have to escape a predator. Okay, so their fight or flight and or that stress hormone is very diluted in animals that are domesticated, and their musculoskeletal system is much different because of breeding over time to get a particular shape or form, right? Than the wild variants. Okay, so we're able to look at wild fowls that comes from the Far East and compare them to chickens that we call chickens today, and we can see that chickens were domesticated, and we can actually track it over time to see it. Now, what does this do with Israel? Well, we know that Palestine today, Israel today, whatever you want to call it, or the Levantine region, is the crossroads between Africa and Asia. So when things are imported, things are coming from the Far East and coming through the Levant before it gets to Africa, and from Africa through the Levant before it gets to anywhere else. Okay, so chickens at some point was brought into that region, and it wasn't the fully domesticated variants, but they became domesticated over time, fully domesticated over time. One was to be used to eat up insects that are undesirable, right? Like they'll peck at it and they'll eat like ants and other kind of pests. And then eventually people use them for food. Okay. In Leviticus chapter 11, we see something very interesting based on the stuff that we're reading, right? The word there for birds is off, which means a flying creature, right? Which we would then say, okay, this means it's a bird, right? However, when we go and we look at the other animals that are there, typically they're giving you the attribute of a particular bird, the attribute. And that attribute is used to identify a class of birds, right? Now we read in verse 13, you want to look for anything that uses the term fowl, right? And it says, Leviticus chapter 11:13, and these you shall detest among the birds, they shall not be eaten, they are detestable. The eagle, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, the falcon of any kind, every raven of any kind, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, the hawk of any kind, the little owl, the cormorant, the short-eared owl, the barn owl, the tawny owl, the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron of any kind, the hoopoe, and the bat. You don't see anything there that says fowl. It's not there. It's not telling you can't eat chicken. It's not there. These are the ones identified that you should not eat. Now, why shouldn't you eat these things? Because the Bible just says why? Well, it's more than just the Bible just says why. This is why you gotta get into the culture and understand where the inspiration came from. Some of these animals, such as the carrion vulture, eats dead things. Why would you want to eat an animal that eats dead things? They've seen over time through trial and error that if we keep eating this bird, we get sick. So we stop eating that bird. We don't eat it no more. Then you have some birds that raise their young all the way into adulthood. And therefore, you cannot kill the parent before the youth become an adult. Because then you wipe out that entire species. And when you do that, guess what happens? You have a breakdown in the hierarchy in regards to the food chain. Because once you start killing off certain species, The environment has to adapt for the lack of that species, and certain things can get out of control because certain owls, they're apex predators. They're designed to keep the pests like rats and rodents at bay. Rats carry disease. Why would you eat all the owls in your environment and then have nothing to kill the rats or the rodents? Then you're going to have an overpopulation of rats and rodents, which means an overabundance of disease and pestilence. Right? This is why when the Israelites were disobeying the statutes, laws, and commandments, they started eating things that they shouldn't eat, and they threw off the entire environmental ecosystem. And the food chain broke down. And therefore, you had vectors for disease, intermediate animals that carry disease, such as rodents. We know when the Black Plague happened, that was one of the vectors of the disease. So it's a practical underlining element to why they should not eat certain animals. Here, the fowl is not mentioned. There's nothing about the fowl that's mentioned here. Number one, textually, the data is not here in Leviticus chapter 11. Now, we know that there's other parts of the text that talk about, the diet of what you should eat and don't eat, such as Deuteronomy chapter 14. So I'm going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 14 for context real quick. And again, these are the things we go over in our classes. We look at the text internally, and then we look at external sources to help validate the things that we're learning in the text. And it tells you the things that you should not eat. In verse 11 says, you may eat all clean birds, but these are the ones that you shall not eat: the eagle, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, the falcon of any kind, every raven of any kind, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, the hawk of any kind, the little owl and the short-eared owl, the barn owl, the tawny owl, the carrion vulture and cormorant, the stork, the heron of any kind, the hoopoe, and the bat. And all winged insects are unclean for you. They shall not be eaten. All clean winged things you may eat. So here you do not see the fowl mentioned. Fowl's not mentioned there. Okay? And that's important. Do fowls exist? Yes. Fowls exist. The text actually mentions fowls.
So the King James version renders it as the cacao, and right? Are you saying
That's
that?
that's what that's that's what they would say, but the cacao is not the domesticated form of the wildfowl that we term chicken. It's something different. It's related, but it's not the same thing. And cacao, if you're going to mention cacao, it's a particular type of bird. Now, that help study from UBS that deals with the fauna and flora, it actually gives you all the history about that animal. And you can see exactly what it looks like, its diet, its nature, its breeding. You got to look at all of that to determine, is this the same animal? It's not the same animal. And that's why I was going to lead me into the second point. In the archaeological record, we see an abundance of chicken bones at various sites. And this goes into every strata in the history of ancient Israel. They've been eating chicken. And the second temple period, they've been eating chicken. Even after 70 AD, they were still eating chicken. They always ate chicken. That was part of their diet. So if you look at the archaeological data and then go into that word cacao that you mentioned and actually see what type of animal that is. Again, remember, they use attributes, which we call verbal nouns, attributes to define what type of animal it is, what type of bird it is. That's important. You got to see what that attribute is and how it's tied to a particular species of birds. And I'm telling you right now, the domesticated wildfowl that we term today as chicken actually has a specific speciation and a taxonomic categorization of animals. It's not the same thing that's mentioned here in the text. It's a totally different bird altogether.
And would you say it's the same for the turkey?
Yes, same thing for the turkey. However, vultures are related to turkeys, right? So, for example, you have some of these carrion vultures that we mentioned there. Turkeys don't just like the turkey vulture. Turkeys don't just go and eat dead things. Just like chickens don't just go eat. They have a specific diet, right? But the carrion vulture, which is similar to the turkey vulture, they're very similar, are vulture that look similar to these type of domesticated fowls or wild fowls. The turkey is not mentioned here. The cacao is not the turkey. It's not chicken. And what I'll probably do, given that we're running out of time, is that when we do another open session, I'll go to that source and I can read it to everybody. And if somebody wants it, I can email it to you. And we're going to go through the various birds that's referenced in Devarim and Vayikra, or Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. And we're going to go through each bird through this resource, and we're going to see what they are. And we're going to see if the chicken and turkey is actually referenced in there, right? And I think that'd be a good thing to do, because if this was a regular class, that would be the one subject matter that we would take 2 hours to go into. And by the time we finished it, you have enough information to make the best informed decision as it pertains to how you should apply the knowledge that you've been learning.
Thank you, my brother. Appreciate the in-depth answer. And yeah, I look forward to the next time you come online, man. And with the scholarship, keep bringing it.
I appreciate that, King. Thank you for your support as always. And if you need anything else from me, just email me or hit me in the back channel, okay?
Will do, absolutely.
All right, so we're technically over time. So unfortunately, I'm not going to take any other questions or comments. Please save them for my next session. I'm gonna try to do these sessions every Tuesday around this time, and then have another one on apologetics on Thursdays. I'm gonna try to maintain that schedule as much as I can. But this one was just an introduction for people who ask me all the time, can you just do a class or a lesson or just give some information on Clubhouse without doing it in a room where you're cut off or interrupted. And I created this Clubhouse months ago, but we only had maybe a handful of sessions on it. But I want to make them more regularly because I see that it's in high demand. I want to make sure that people are thoroughly equipped when they're going into the text so they can get repeatable results. The intended repeatable results, the way that they were experiencing back then, we can experience them today. And I'm a testament of that occurring, right? Once I'm able to unlock these things through extensive research, going to conferences, speaking with people in academia, learning the language, walking with people who are Bedouins, and seeing how they live. There's an excellent book called Bedouin Culture in the Bible. Bedouin Culture in the Bible. Excellent reference if you actually want to see a people group that exists today that live just like the patriarchs did. And once you look at how those people live today and the customs and mannerisms, it gives you insight on how to decipher the things that was occurring and being done by the patriarchs that's mentioned in the text. All right. So I'm gonna end off here. Dre, do you have anything that you want to say real quick before we jump off? I guess he.
Oh,
Oh,
hey, shalom. Hey, sorry. I had a question about uh grace, because I was looking at Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 10, and I noticed like how in our culture today we kind of say grace beforehand. Is that something that we should apply with saying, giving our thanks after we eat?
Good question. Did he get disconnected?
oh, shoot, my bad. I was on mute this whole time. Um, Thank you for that. What I was saying was, in Rabbinic Judaism, a custom has came about where prayers are made. Dre, mic real quick. Prayers are made after food is eaten, and that's based on Deuteronomy 8 and 10. And then in Christianity, prayers are made before you eat. And a lot of that's predicated back to the Last Supper, where Yeshua gives thanks before they begin their meal, right? And then you'll see also Paul or Paul, he picks it up and says, give thanks for everything and so forth, and it develops in there. But keenly, they typically do not pray before they eat in Israelite culture. So what this is saying is it's a overarching hold on one Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay.
I had to ask that question about the chicken because I know a big portion of Israel fell away, probably for not lack of knowledge. You know, they ate pig. I ate pig. You know what I'm saying? And I ain't no better. That the most I say, don't eat it. So
Definitely.
All right, my bad. So what I was saying was, so in ancient Israel, and again, I have a book that goes into these customs based on archaeological digs to see where in the household that the family ate, and they typically ate in the main room, which would be considered our living room, on the floor with a mat, and they didn't have any utensils. Typically, they would use bread as a utensil to pick up food, to sop up stuff, and they would eat that way. But we didn't really have anything in regards to a prayer. From what we could see, what they typically would do is take a sample of the food they ate, and they will put it on a shrine, right, which would be a food offering that they would give to the deity before they began to eat. They made sure that they fed the deity before they ate. It's symbolic of giving back that percentage of that portion. So we really don't see anywhere in the Tanakh where it says you should pray before you eat. Prayer pretty much means to intervene. The word is palal, right? It literally means to interpose or intervene, or to seek an appeal for something, right? There's no need to do that when you eat, right? Here, where it says, when you have eaten and are satisfied, to give thanks to the Most High for the good land that He has given you, right? So after you're eaten filled, meaning that when the Israelites cross over the Jordan and into Canaan, and they subdue the land, and they're getting the milk and honey and everything that you see in the two verses above that in Deuteronomy 8 and 8, right? You see all these other items that they're getting. After you've had your fill of these things, to thank the Most High for these things, right? So typically customs will develop out of that. And that is why you see like a lot of customs where they'll talk about, oh, you pray after you eat or pray before you eat. But there's tons of extra biblical works that actually show the development of where this custom or practice comes from. But if you're interested in that, I can send you a couple of sources on it and you can see it for yourself.
Definitely, definitely.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
I certainly appreciate this information, man.
Anytime.
And that was a great question.
Yeah, anytime. And again, with more time in these classes, typically we take inquiries or we create questions or points, and we take 2 hours and we comb through it thoroughly, right? With everything that you need, every tool, every resource, every approach that you need in order to answer any kind of question that may come up as it pertains to the scriptures, right? So with that, I'm gonna close out. Thank you for everybody for joining the session. I appreciate it. Again, this session will be recorded. We're actually going to add it to our Patreon. We'll make it available on other forms of social media for a limited time. But all these classes that we do on here as well will be on our Patreon, which you can get access to it. We thank you to everybody who just signed up for the Patreon and sent your support. We appreciate it. But if anybody has any need or request for anything that we can assist with, email us at kingdomharbinger@gmail.com. We appreciate everybody for joining and sharing your time with us. And we'll speak to you again. All right. Peace and shalom, everyone.
All praises to the Most High Yah.
Shalom.